Good morning. I'm honored to be speaking with you today. The title of my speech is The Heartbeat of Your Music. Imagine you're walking in New Orleans in the French Quarter and you come upon this jazz combo. The music is all over the place. Jazz is very, very scatterbrained. And the trombone is soloing the same time as the sax is soloing, and you have no idea what's going on. Yet, you find your foot tapping, your head nodding, maybe you're even clapping your hands, even in the midst of this craziness going on. And the reason for that is largely because of the drums, but not just any drum, particularly the snare drum. Today I would like to inform you about the components of the snare drum and its dynamic uses in music today. Let's start off with its reputation. The snare drum has been around for a long, long time. The Vienna Symphonic Library, it has a record of uses of it as early as 1332. But the snare drum didn't necessarily start off being used in music. It was also used in war and communication for troops in war. This is a picture to illustrate the first major uses of the snare drum were used in war. Obviously this isn't a picture from 1332, just to illustrate the use in war. But that reputation gives its credibility, and it's developed a lot over the years. The reason the snare drum is the most dynamic drum that we use is because it has a sound that rises above all the other drums. The snare drum here is in the middle, just rising above any other sort of drum we have, whether it be African, a drum tom, or a bass kick, bongos, or congas. Let's get into the components of the snare drum. I'm going to walk you through the top all the way down to the bottom. Here's some pictures of snare drums and their components, simply to illustrate that it is not as simple as some may think. The snare drum has a lot of parts and components that makes it that dynamic, powerful percussion instrument that we know today. Let's start with the top, the skins or the heads, that some might call it. This is where the stick actually makes contact with the drum to produce sound. There's two types of top heads, a battered head and a clear head. And the clear heads are thinner and more sensitive. The battered heads are thicker with a rough material sprayed onto the plastic, making it stronger. You can hit it harder, and often it's louder. Moving on to the bottom skin, this is the skin that the snares actually rest on and produces the snare sound, the crackle or the pop that the snare drum gives. And they're almost always clear, and they're thinner and more sensitive as well. Moving on to the hardware, the rims or the hoops, as some may call them, are the metal hoops that hold the skin onto the drum. And there's usually just two basic ones, a single flanged and a double flanged. And the double flanged is just stronger, and it is it gives a better sound. The rims or the hoops hold the tension rods and that go into the lug casing. Lug casings are what we're going to talk about next. The lug casings are what hold the tension rods on the snare drum, and the tension rods screw into the lug casings so that you can tune or tighten the skins or loosen them as much as you need to. The tension rods are these little screws that go down into the hoop, down into the lug casing, pulling the skins over the shell of the drum, and that gives you your pitch. The strainer or the tension bolt is mounted on the side of the snare drum, as you can see in this picture. The strainer is this lever if you pull it down, it releases the snares and drops them from the bottom, so that if you hit the drum, it'll give a hollow sound. Those snares aren't activated. If you flip the lever up, the snares suck back up onto the head, and they give it that crack that you need when you hit it. The tension bolt is this guy right here, and you can loosen it or tighten it in order to make the snares really tight or just kind of loose on the bottom head, giving it a tighter sound like a ka, or a looser sound like a t. So it's really, really useful when you're playing different sorts of music. Now the shell is the main body that wraps around. It's the drum that all these components are attached to. You can have a wood shell or a metal shell or a composite shell like fiberglass, but usually there's only two types, a wood and a metal. The wood is a softer, warmer sound. The metal is a aggressive, harder sound. And so moving from the top all the way down to the bottom of the snare drum, the last part is the snares themselves. This is what gives the snare its unique sound and pushes it above all those other drums like we saw in the previous slide. Our ears today recognize this sound. It's the sound that we clap to, that we tap our foot to. So you can have snares made out of different material, but usually they're metal. And there's smaller ones and larger ones depending on how much of a metal snarey sound you want. Now the snare drum is so unique, it's so different. It is the most dynamic drum that we have because of all of the different uses and the sticks that we can use with it as well. You can play with the snares on, you can play with the snares off, you can play with mallets, you can play with it tuned really tight or tuned really low, you can play with brushes, regular sticks, there's just a lot you can do with it. These are called hot rods, they're little dowel rods wrapped together so it has a more soft sound, as if you're playing in a coffee shop you might want to use hot rods or brushes. If you're playing in a concert, a rock concert, a symphonic concert, classical music, you might want to use a snare stick. So there's so many different uses for the snare drum. And the snare is the drum that is in all genres. Whether it's symphony, classic rock, reggae, jazz, or even DJs electronically synthesize the sound of the snare drum. So the snare drum is everywhere. Its history and reputation gives its credibility. The way it's built gives it the sounds needed to stand out among other drums. Its dynamic uses give it opportunities to be featured in a large variety of genres. The snare gives us something to clap along to. The snare is the heartbeat of your music. So next time you're listening to music or you come upon that live street band and you find yourself tapping your foot, give a little credit and give a little love to the snare drum. Thanks for listening.